Hello everyone, in this video we will present to you Psalm 74. When we read this psalm, our group was able to name several moods and tones. First, sadness and suffering. Starting from verse 1, the psalmist is asking God why do they have to suffer. In other verses, we can also find that the community is telling God that their enemies destroyed their sanctuary. Second, complaining. The action of complaining is related to the feeling of sadness and suffering, especially regarding God's dwelling place that was defiled and destroyed. Third, hopeful. The hopefulness can be observed in the change of mood starting from verses 12 until 18 in their petitions. They hope for God's goodness in confidence that God will surely deliver them. Structure outline. First, we find the superscription, a plea for help in time of national humiliation, a maskil of Asaph. Verses 1 to 3. We call them as an introduction, for they show us the situation of the community where we could recognize the feeling and the mood from the psalm. However, we were able to see two important subsections. First, vocative prayer, where the psalmist is calling God. Second, call for remembrance in verses 2 and 3. The psalmist shows that the community is calling God to look at their suffering. Verses 4 to 11. Narration of the complaint or description of the suffering. The psalmist continues with a narration of their experience of suffering that caused them sadness and distress. The psalmist used some poetic language and graphic images to illustrate their experiences. Verse 4, roar within your holy place, shows an expression of anger to commence a war against the holy place. Verse 5, they hack the wooden trellis with axes to express the way the enemies threaten the holy place. Verse 6 onward, we find the poetic expression of how the psalmist describes their situation. Verses 12 to 17. The community's persuasion to God to help them. In this section, we feel that the psalmist or the community persuades God to give help by recalling his gracious deeds in the past, like in verses 13, recalling the experience the Red Sea. Verse 14, God defeated the enemies, the Leviathan. Verse 16 to 17, express God's almighty deeds of creations. Verse 18 to 23 is the request or cry for help, the petition of the prayer. Here the psalmist is asking God to protect them and save them from the oppression of their enemies. In verses 18, 22 to 23 appears to us that the psalmist is once again asking God to remember the counterpart, the enemies, and their evil action. Verse 19 to 21, in the poetic form, the psalmist asks God to deliver them from their enemies, the use of dove for Israel, and the wild animal for their enemies. The genre of the psalm. After reading the psalms, we agreed that the genre of this psalm is community lament, because it contains the element of lament, suffering, complaining, requesting for help, remembering, and affirming what God has done in their life history, and the end is asking God's immediate help. Furthermore, we consider it as a community lament because the psalmist always refer to the oppressed subject as us, them, and we, which are all in plural form, hence signifying that it does not refer to an individual suffering, but communal oppression of suffering. The setting of the psalm. According to Gerstenberger commentary, one should not immediately consider the setting of the psalm in the 6th century with Nebuchadnezzar's actions of destroying the temple. Psalm 74 may refer to a different non-known profanation of the temple in later times. However, an important note made by Gertensberger is worth considering. He says that what is more important is life situation of the community at that time. He said that maybe in Psalm 74 illustrates a crisis that happened during desecration of places where sacrificial rituals or other ceremonies like celebration memories are being held aside from the temple since it was ruined. Hence, the main intention of Psalm 74 is to unite the people into pleading for a sure intervention from Yahweh to surpass the crisis. This is for us. Thank you.